The mist hangs over Loch Naver the way it always does in March. Thick. Gray. The kind that makes distance impossible to judge, that turns familiar landscape into something unknowable. The water is dark, not the inviting blue of summer postcards, but the deep, cold black of a highland loch that doesn't give back what it takes. On March 25, 2022, a Friday afternoon, a man stood at the edge of this wilderness with a green rucksack on his shoulders and a plan in his mind. His name was Finn Creaney. He was 32 years old. He had long brown hair that fell to his lower back, a full beard, and a brown leather jacket that looked like something out of a film, aged, comfortable, the kind of thing someone wears when they know exactly who they are. He had freckles on his arms and nose. A slim build. Brown boots that laced above the ankle. He was a father. A husband. A teacher of survival skills to children who loved learning from him. And in exactly 2 months, he would become a father again, though he would never know it. This isn't a story about what happened. It's a story about what didn't. About the silence that followed. About the people left waiting. And about the Highlands, which keep their secrets better than anywhere else on Earth. That morning, Finn had driven his car to Golspie Beach and parked it there. The plan was simple: hike from Loch Naver, southeast through the wilderness, and end at Golspie where his car would be waiting. A challenge. A weekend adventure. The kind of thing Finn had done before. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. A family member drove Finn from Golspie back up to the starting point near Loch Naver. They dropped him off at a caravan park on the B873 road around 2:15 in the afternoon. It was an unseasonably warm March day. Spring arriving early in the Highlands, which is rare, which makes people optimistic. Finn stepped out of the car. He adjusted his rucksack. And he walked toward the wilderness. That was the last confirmed sighting. But hours before that, there had been a voicemail. At 12:52 p.m., Lucy Creaney's phone lit up with a message from her husband. She was at home in the Tain area, 31 weeks pregnant, preparing for the launch of her floristry business. Mother's Day was Sunday, just 2 days away, and Finn had promised to be back by midday to help her deliver flowers to customers. It was important. The business was new. She needed him there. When she listened to the voicemail, his voice was warm. Light. The voice of someone who was exactly where he wanted to be. Hey honey. I love you lots, and I'm really proud of you. That was it. Lucy smiled when she heard it. She sent a message back. But Finn never read it. At 1:47 p.m., Finn's phone cut off in the village of Lairg. Either the battery died, or it was switched off, or something happened to it. Lucy could see that her messages weren't being delivered. She could see they hadn't been read. She thought it was strange. Finn was filming his adventures for his YouTube channel, Wildcat Bushcraft. He'd need his phone for navigation, for recording. He always kept it charged. Always stayed in contact. But she didn't panic. Not yet. Finn was experienced. Confident. A survivalist who taught children how to build emergency shelters in sub-zero temperatures. He knew the Highlands better than most. He was the kind of person who always came home. Lucy went to bed Friday night thinking he was fine. Saturday came and went. Still no word. Sunday, Mother's Day, arrived. Midday passed. No Finn. No car pulling into the driveway. No flowers delivered. No phone call. On Monday morning, Lucy did something she later described as feeling ridiculous. She called the school where Finn worked, teaching bushcraft to children. I'm Finn Creaney's wife, she said, her voice uncertain. And this is going to sound weird, but is Finn there? They told her he wasn't. Then they checked the whole school, every classroom, every hallway, the outdoor areas, and called her back to confirm. He wasn't there. Lucy hung up the phone and sat in the silence of her home. She was 31 weeks pregnant. Her daughter Luna, 4 years old, was somewhere nearby, playing, unaware that anything was wrong. And Lucy was holding a phone that had no answers. She called the police. Even as she did it, she felt certain she was overreacting. She was sure that any minute, Finn would walk through the door, laughing, saying, "Are you for real?" He was like a cat, she thought. He always landed on his feet. He always came home. But there was another thought beneath that one. A quieter thought. What if something happened? What if there had been an accident? What if he'd fallen? What if? She stopped herself. Looking back, she would describe this moment as the beginning of shock. The inability to make sense of absence. The mind refusing to process what the body already knows. The police took the report seriously. Finn Creaney, 32 years old, last seen Friday afternoon near Loch Naver in Sutherland. Planned route from Loch Naver to Golspie. Expected home Sunday. No contact since Friday. They began searching immediately. Mountain rescue teams were deployed. Police Scotland's air support unit joined. Coast Guard. Divers. Volunteers from the local community who knew the terrain, who knew how easy it was to disappear in the Highlands even when you knew what you were doing. The search area was vast. More than 3,500 square miles of rugged, unforgiving landscape. Mountains. Moors. Cliffs. Bogs. Lochs so deep they could swallow a body and never give it back. Days turned into weeks. Nothing. No sign of Finn. No clothing. No equipment. No body. Lucy gave birth to their son on May 29, 2022. She named him Bran. Finn never met him. 2 weeks before Finn disappeared, Lucy and Finn had found out they were having a boy. It was a dream come true. They'd talked about it endlessly, the family they were building, the life they were creating. Everything was coming together beautifully. They'd just gotten married in August 2021. Finn's business was thriving. Easter classes were fully booked. He had a contract in the pipeline with Action for Children. Lucy was launching her floristry business. Their daughter Luna adored her father. And soon, there would be a son. Finn had been described by everyone who knew him as the happiest he'd ever been. And then he walked into the wilderness. And never walked out. Mark Creaney hadn't spoken to his son in months. They'd had an argument. Something small. The kind of disagreement families have that feels important in the moment and utterly meaningless later. Mark couldn't even remember what it was about by the time Lucy called to tell him Finn was missing. He was in Spain when the call came. He got on the first flight home. Within days, Mark was in the Highlands, walking the same hills his son had walked. He stayed for 18 months. Not visiting. Not searching occasionally. Staying. He pitched a tent near Loch Naver and lived there, scanning the landscape, talking to locals, retracing routes, refusing to leave until he found his son. Mark was a businessman. He had a life in England. Responsibilities. But none of that mattered anymore. His son was somewhere in these hills. And Mark believed, needed to believe, that if he just looked hard enough, long enough, he would find him. The first few weeks of the search were frantic. Helicopters overhead. Divers in the loch. Teams spread across moorland and mountain. The community rallied. People who'd never met Finn joined the search because that's what you do in the Highlands. When someone is missing, everyone looks. But as days became weeks, the intensity began to fade. Not because people stopped caring. But because hope has a shelf life. Especially in terrain like this. The Highlands are beautiful in the way ancient things are beautiful, indifferent to human need, shaped by forces far older than civilization. Loch Naver is a freshwater loch, nearly 6 miles long, surrounded by mountains and moorland. In March, the water temperature hovers around 4 to 6 degrees Celsius. Cold enough to kill in minutes. Deep enough to hide a body indefinitely. The area Finn was hiking through is remote even by Highland standards. There are no towns. No villages. Just the occasional cottage, empty for most of the year. The nearest road is miles away. Mobile phone signal is non-existent in most places. If something went wrong out there, there would be no one to hear you. No one to find you. Not unless they were specifically looking. And even then, Lucy tried to hold things together at home. She was heavily pregnant, running a new business, caring for a 4-year-old who kept asking where Daddy was. Luna didn't understand. How could she? Finn had been gone before. He'd taken trips. He always came back. But this time felt different. Even to a 4-year-old, the silence felt different. Lucy later said she felt like she was living in 2 realities at once. In one reality, Finn was fine. He'd gotten lost, maybe injured, but he was surviving. Using his bushcraft skills. Building shelter. Waiting to be found. Any day now, he'd walk out of the wilderness with a story to tell. In the other reality, the one she couldn't fully face, he was already gone. The human mind does this. It splits. It compartmentalizes. Because the full weight of loss, all at once, would be too much to carry. So Lucy carried both realities. She prepared for Finn to come home. And she prepared for him never to come home. And somehow, impossibly, she kept going. The police continued their investigation. They tracked Finn's last known movements with precision. The voicemail at 12:52 p.m. The phone cutting off at 1:47 p.m. in Lairg. The drop-off at the caravan park around 2:15 p.m. They interviewed the family member who'd driven him. They reviewed CCTV footage from the surrounding area, though there wasn't much. They checked his bank accounts. His phone records. His social media. Nothing. No suspicious activity. No unusual purchases. No indication of anything except exactly what it appeared to be, a man going on a hike. But there was one detail that kept nagging at investigators. Finn's car was found at Golspie Beach, exactly where he'd left it. The keys were inside, hidden under the seat. Everything was as it should be. But inside the car, police found Finn's wallet. His bank cards. His identification. He'd left them behind intentionally. Because he was going into the wilderness and he wouldn't need them. He was planning to return to the car. He had no reason to carry a wallet into the backcountry. But it meant that when he disappeared with nothing that could identify him. No ID. No bank cards. Just the clothes on his back, the rucksack on his shoulders, and whatever was inside it. Months passed. Summer came to the Highlands. The hills turned green. Tourists arrived, walking the same trails Finn might have walked. The loch warmed, just slightly. Mark remained. He hiked every day. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with volunteers who'd join him for a weekend before returning to their normal lives. He became a fixture in the area. The men in the tent by the loch. The father searching for his son. Local people brought him food. Supplies. Information. I saw something, they'd say. Out past Craskin. Looked like it might be fabric. Mark would go. Every time. No matter how unlikely. He found sheep carcasses. Old fishing gear. Discarded camping equipment from previous decades. But never Finn. Lucy gave birth in late May. It should have been one of the happiest days of her life. She was holding her son. Her beautiful, healthy baby boy. The child Finn had been so excited to meet. But Finn wasn't there. And that absence filled the room. Lucy named him Bran, as planned. She took photos. She sent updates to family. She did all the things new mothers do. But underneath it all was a grief so profound it had no language. How do you mourn someone who hasn't been confirmed dead? How do you celebrate new life while waiting for confirmation of death? Lucy existed in that impossible space for months. The community tried to help. Friends brought meals. Family visited. Police remained in contact, updating her whenever there was news, which was almost never. But mostly, Lucy was alone with her children, waiting. And the question that haunted her, the question she couldn't answer, was whether she was waiting for Finn to come home, or waiting for his body to be found. Because at some point, those became the only two options. By autumn, the official search had scaled down significantly. There were no new leads. No new evidence. The massive deployment of resources couldn't be sustained indefinitely. Police Scotland shifted from active searching to monitoring, waiting for something to surface, literally or figuratively. But Mark didn't stop. He stayed through autumn. Through winter. Into 2023. He walked the same routes over and over, convinced that persistence would eventually yield results. That if he just looked one more time, in one more place, he'd find something. His commitment was extraordinary. And heartbreaking. Because every day he stayed was another day of life put on hold. Another day of refusing to accept what seemed increasingly certain. Finn was gone. Lucy, meanwhile, was learning to live in permanent uncertainty. She'd returned to work. She was raising Luna and Bran. She was running her floristry business. From the outside, life appeared to be continuing. But grief doesn't follow timelines. And the absence of a body meant there could be no funeral. No burial. No ritual to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Just endless waiting. Luna started school. She told her teachers her daddy was missing. The teachers didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that her father might never come home? That the world can swallow people whole and never give them back? Bran grew. He learned to sit up, to crawl, to babble. He would never remember his father. He would only know Finn through stories. Through photographs. Through the absence that shaped his mother's face when she thought no one was looking. And then, 18 months after Finn disappeared, something changed. October 2023. 2 deerstalkers, hunters who know the Highlands intimately, who spend their lives in these hills, were walking along the shores of Loch Naver. And they saw something. A shape. Dark green against the bracken and heather. They walked closer. It was a rucksack. The rucksack was exactly where it shouldn't have been. Not hidden in undergrowth. Not buried. Not submerged. It was lying on the shore of Loch Naver, partially visible, as if it had been there all along. As if hundreds of searchers had somehow walked past it for 18 months without seeing it. The deerstalkers recognized it immediately. They'd been following the case. Everyone in the area had been following the case. A green rucksack. Finn's rucksack. They called the police. Mark received the call within hours. 18 months of searching. 18 months of hoping. And finally, something. He rushed to the location. Police were already there, securing the scene, photographing everything, treating it like what it was, the first tangible evidence in a missing person case that had gone cold. When Mark saw the rucksack, something inside him cracked. Not relief. Not closure. Just the confirmation that his son had been here. That this wasn't a mistake, wasn't a misunderstanding. Finn had been in these hills. This was real. The rucksack was taken away for examination. And Mark waited, again, for answers. The contents of the rucksack told a story, but not the one anyone wanted to hear. Inside were Finn's belongings. Personal items. The things you'd pack for a weekend in the wilderness. But there was something else. Something Mark later referenced in interviews but wouldn't specify publicly. There were a few other items we can't really get into, he said. That single sentence has haunted every discussion of this case since. What items? Why couldn't they be discussed? Were they evidence of something? Or simply private, too painful to share? The police never released a full inventory. Mark never elaborated. And the ambiguity created space for speculation, though Mark himself had a clear theory about what happened. He believed Finn had tried to swim across Loch Naver. Looking at a map, the theory makes a certain kind of sense. Finn's planned route from Loch Naver to Golspie was roughly 20 miles through difficult terrain. Mountains. Moorland. Bogs that could swallow you to the waist if you stepped wrong. But Loch Naver itself is only about 6 miles long at its widest point, and much narrower in places. If Finn was looking at the landscape, calculating distances, thinking about efficiency, which someone with his experience might do, swimming across the loch could save hours. Maybe a whole day. It would be cold. Dangerous. But Finn was a strong swimmer. His father said so repeatedly. Finn loved wild swimming. He'd done it before in Scottish lochs. Maybe he looked at the water and thought, I can do this. Maybe he stripped down, packed his clothes in the rucksack, left it on the shore to collect later from the other side. Maybe he waded in, felt the shock of cold water, but pushed through it because he'd felt cold water before. Maybe he made it 20 meters. 50. 100. And maybe that's when his body betrayed him. Cold water shock is not the same as being cold. It's a physiological response that happens in seconds. When your body hits water below 15 degrees Celsius, your nervous system goes haywire. Your heart rate spikes. You gasp involuntarily, a reflex you cannot control. If your head is underwater when you gasp, you inhale water. If you're in deep water, you panic. Even Olympic swimmers have drowned in cold water. Because it doesn't matter how strong you are, how experienced, how confident. Cold water doesn't care. The initial shock lasts about 90 seconds. If you survive that, you have maybe 10 to 15 minutes before your muscles stop responding. Your arms won't pull. Your legs won't kick. You just stop. After that, hypothermia sets in. You lose consciousness. You slip under. And in a loch like Naver, deep, dark, with currents no one fully understands, a body can sink and stay down for weeks. Months. Sometimes forever. But here's what doesn't fit. If Finn tried to swim the loch and drowned, where is his body? The police deployed specialist dive teams after the rucksack was found. They searched the loch extensively. Used sonar. Sent divers down into the cold darkness. They found nothing. Bodies in freshwater don't always behave predictably. Decomposition rates vary. Currents can move remains significant distances. Cold water preserves tissue longer, delays the gases that bring bodies to the surface. But 18 months. And nothing. It's possible. But unusual. Then there's the rucksack itself. If Finn left it on the shore before swimming, planning to retrieve it from the other side, why was it found on the same shore 18 months later? Why hadn't anyone seen it before? The area had been searched thoroughly. Repeatedly. By professionals, by volunteers, by Mark himself who walked these shores hundreds of times. Had it been hidden somehow? Buried under snow during winter, revealed only when the seasons changed? Or had it been somewhere else entirely, and only recently placed where it was found? The police never suggested foul play. There was no evidence of it. But the questions lingered. Mark spent those 18 months camping near the loch, and during that time, he came to know the landscape intimately. He learned the patterns of the weather. The way mist moved. The places where things washed ashore after storms. He spoke with locals who'd lived there for decades, who knew the loch's moods better than any outsider could. One story haunted him. An old local told him about Loch Naver's reputation. How it was known, quietly, as a place that didn't give things back. How over the years, animals had drowned, deer, sheep, and their bodies were never recovered. How the loch's depth and the way the land shelved meant that anything sinking in certain spots would stay down. The loch keeps what it takes, the old man said. Mark didn't want to believe it. But after 18 months of searching, after finding the rucksack but nothing else, he started to wonder if maybe the locals were right. Maybe Loch Naver had Finn. And maybe it would never give him back. In early 2024, the family made a decision. They would install a memorial bench near Loch Naver. Not because they'd given up hope. But because they needed something. Some place to go. Some physical reminder that Finn had existed, had been here, had mattered. The bench was placed overlooking the water, with a plaque bearing Finn's name and dates. Lucy brought the children. Luna was 6 now. Bran was nearly 2. They sat on the bench together, looking out at the loch that had taken their husband, their father, and refused to give him back. Luna asked if Daddy was in the water. Lucy didn't know how to answer. Because the honest answer was, maybe. Maybe he was down there, somewhere in the dark. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he'd made it across the loch after all, and something else had happened on the other side. An accident on the far shore. A fall. An injury that left him unable to call for help. Maybe he'd wandered, disoriented, into even more remote areas. Maybe he was out there still, somewhere, waiting to be found. Or maybe he'd never been in the loch at all. Maybe the rucksack had been separated from him some other way, and he continued on without it, and whatever happened next happened elsewhere. The not knowing was the worst part. By March 2025, 3 years after Finn disappeared, the family released a statement. After years of searching, years of hoping, years of living in suspended grief, they announced they were ending their search. Not because they'd found answers, but because they couldn't keep living like this. Mark had spent 18 months in the Highlands. He'd hiked thousands of miles. He'd looked in places most people would never go. He'd done everything humanly possible. Lucy had raised 2 children alone while running a business and holding on to hope that seemed increasingly impossible. They'd both reached the same conclusion: they had to let go. Not of Finn, but of the search. They had to choose life over endless waiting. The statement was heartbreaking in its simplicity. They thanked everyone who'd helped search. The police. The volunteers. The local community. They expressed gratitude for the support they'd received. And then they said they were beginning their healing journey. Whatever that meant. However you heal from something that has no resolution. But even in that statement, there was something unsaid. Mark mentioned that over the 3 years, they'd received numerous tips from people claiming to have seen Finn or someone matching his description. None of the tips led anywhere. But the fact that people were still seeing someone 3 years later suggested something disturbing. Either there were false sightings, people mistaking strangers for a missing man they'd seen in the news. Or there was someone out there who looked enough like Finn to be noticed. Or, worst of all, some of those sightings might have been real. And Finn might have been alive, somewhere, for reasons no one could understand. That possibility, however remote, is perhaps the cruelest part of all. Because it means that even now, even after the family has chosen to stop searching, there's a chance. A tiny, terrible chance. That Finn is out there. There's a photograph of Finn that circulated widely after he disappeared. He's smiling. Long hair pulled back. Beard full and well kept. He's wearing his brown leather jacket, the one he had on when he vanished. He looks happy. Confident. Like someone who knew exactly who he was. That photograph was printed on missing person posters. Shared thousands of times on social media. Shown on news broadcasts across Scotland and beyond. And every time someone saw it, they were looking at the last known image of a man who would simply cease to exist 3 months later. But what the photograph doesn't show, what no image could capture, is the weight of the questions Finn left behind. Not just where is he, but why. Lucy tried to make sense of the timeline dozens of times. She'd go over it again and again, looking for something she'd missed. Some clue hidden in the ordinary details of that Friday. The voicemail at 12:52 p.m. Finn's voice warm, loving, proud of her. Nothing unusual. Nothing that suggested anything was wrong. The phone cutting off at 1:47 p.m. in Lairg. Still 50 minutes before he was dropped off at the starting point. Why did the phone die then? Finn was meticulous about charging devices. His YouTube channel depended on it. He filmed everything. He'd need his phone for navigation, for recording, for emergencies. Had the battery died unexpectedly? Possible, but unlikely. Finn would have checked before leaving. Had he turned it off to save battery? Maybe. But then why send a voicemail 2 hours earlier? Why not wait until he was about to start hiking? Or had something happened between 1:47 p.m. and 2:15 p.m. that caused the phone to stop working? That 28-minute gap. Lucy couldn't stop thinking about it. 28 minutes when Finn was somewhere between Lairg and Loch Naver, in a vehicle with a family member, heading to his drop-off point. 28 minutes when his phone went dark. And then he was dropped off, waved goodbye, and walked into the wilderness. What happened in those 28 minutes? Probably nothing. But probably isn't certainty. And when certainty is the only thing you want, probably feels like torture. Mark had his own timeline he couldn't reconcile. The rucksack. Found in October 2023, 18 months after Finn disappeared. If Finn had left it on the shore before attempting to swim the loch, which Mark believed he had, then the rucksack should have been found immediately. It was lying in the open. Not buried. Not hidden in dense undergrowth. Just there, on the shore, exactly where searchers had looked dozens of times. Mark himself had walked that area. Multiple times. How had he missed it? How had everyone missed it? The police offered no explanation. The discovery was treated as straightforward, a piece of evidence that had finally been located after an extensive search. But Mark kept coming back to the same question: where was it for 18 months? 3 theories circulated, none of them satisfying. Theory 1, the rucksack had been there all along, but searchers simply overlooked it. Human error. The Highlands are vast, and even trained professionals can miss things in terrain like that. Theory 2, the rucksack had been buried under snow during the winter of 2022 to 2023, only becoming visible again after the snow melted in spring or summer 2023. The deerstalkers found it in October, which would align with this timeline. Theory 3, the rucksack had been somewhere else, possibly in the loch itself, and had washed ashore months later, deposited on the shore by currents or tides after storms. Each theory was plausible. Each theory was incomplete. And Mark was left with the same maddening uncertainty that defined everything about Finn's disappearance. The contents of the rucksack became a focal point of speculation, particularly because of Mark's cryptic comment about items we can't really get into. What did that mean? Some speculated it was something personal. Something private that the family didn't want shared publicly out of respect for Finn's dignity. Others wondered if it was evidence of Finn's state of mind. Had there been a journal? A note? Something that suggested he'd been struggling in ways the family hadn't known. But everyone who knew Finn insisted he'd been happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. He was excited about the baby. His business was thriving. He had everything to live for. There was no indication of depression. No history of mental health struggles. No signs that he'd been considering anything other than a weekend hike. Still, the ambiguity gnawed at people. Because when someone disappears without explanation, the human mind fills in blanks. It creates narratives. It searches for patterns even when none exist. And the phrase, items we can't get into, created a blank that refused to be ignored. In the months after the rucksack was found, Mark gave several interviews. He was always composed. Always careful with his words. But you could see the weight he was carrying. The lines in his face. The exhaustion in his eyes. In one interview, he talked about the moment he learned about the rucksack discovery. I was hopeful, he said. I thought, finally, we'll get some answers. But the answers never came. The rucksack was examined. Tested. Catalogued. And it told them nothing they didn't already know. Finn had been here. He'd had his belongings with him. And then he'd vanished. Mark also spoke about the 18 months he spent searching. How it had consumed him. How he'd become obsessed with finding his son, to the point where nothing else mattered. I couldn't leave, he said. I couldn't go home knowing he was out there somewhere. Knowing I might find him if I just looked a little harder. But eventually, even Mark had to face reality. He wasn't going to find Finn. Not by walking the hills. Not by asking questions. Not by sheer force of will. If Finn was in the loch, he was too deep to recover. If he was on land, he was in a place no one had thought to look. Or he was nowhere. Just gone. Lucy's experience was different, but no less agonizing. While Mark was in the Highlands searching physically, Lucy was home, searching emotionally. She went through Finn's belongings. His clothes. His tools. His bushcraft equipment. Looking for something, anything, that might explain what happened. She found his journals from previous hikes. Detailed notes about terrain, weather, gear. Finn was methodical. He planned everything. But there was no plan for the Loch Naver hike. No written route. No detailed notes about what he intended to do. Just the simple plan, hike from Loch Naver to Golspie. Return Sunday midday. It was so casual. So routine for someone like Finn. And that casualness made it worse. Because it suggested he hadn't anticipated any problems. Hadn't thought this hike would be any different from the dozens he'd done before. He'd kissed his family goodbye and walked away, expecting to see them in 2 days. And instead, he'd walked into a mystery that would consume their lives. By 2024, Lucy had made a decision. She would tell the children the truth. Luna was old enough to understand now. 6 years old, asking questions that deserved honest answers. Where's Daddy? Is he coming home? Why did he leave us? Lucy sat her daughter down and explained, as gently as she could, that Daddy had gone on a hike and something had happened. They didn't know what. But Daddy wasn't coming home. Luna asked if he was dead. Lucy said probably. Luna asked if they'd ever find him. Lucy said she didn't know. Luna was quiet for a long time after that. Then she asked if it was her fault. And Lucy's heart broke in a way it hadn't broken before. Because children internalize absence. They make it about themselves. They search for reasons, for logic, for something they did wrong that caused the person to leave. Lucy held her daughter and promised her, over and over, that none of this was her fault. That Daddy loved her more than anything. That whatever happened out there in the Highlands had nothing to do with Luna. But she could see in her daughter's eyes that the words weren't enough. Because how do you explain randomness to a child? How do you explain that sometimes terrible things happen for no reason at all? Bran would never have that conversation. He was too young when Finn disappeared. He had no memories of his father. No voice to remember. No face except in photographs. As he grew, he'd ask about the men in the pictures. That's your daddy, Lucy would say. And Bran would nod, accepting it the way children accept information they have no context for. But he'd never really know Finn. He'd know stories. Facts. Second-hand memories filtered through other people's grief. But he wouldn't know what it felt like to be held by his father. To hear his voice. To have him there. And that loss, that absence of something you never had, is its own kind of grief. The community response to Finn's disappearance was remarkable. Hundreds of people joined searches. Fundraisers were organized to support the family. Local businesses donated supplies to search teams. Volunteers gave up weekends, holidays, vacation time to help look for a man most of them had never met. It spoke to something fundamental about Highland culture. When someone is lost in the wilderness, you help. You don't ask questions. You don't weigh costs. You simply go. But as months turned into years, the community's role shifted. They couldn't search forever. But they could remember. The memorial bench became a gathering place. People left flowers there. Notes. Small tokens. Photographs. It became a physical manifestation of collective grief. A way for people who never knew Finn to acknowledge that his loss mattered. That he mattered. And for Lucy and the children, it became a place to visit. To sit quietly. To feel close to Finn even though he wasn't there. Even though he might never be there again. In March 2025, 3 years to the day after Finn disappeared, Lucy posted something on social media. It wasn't an update about the search. It wasn't a plea for information. It was a photograph of Bran, now almost 3 years old, sitting on the memorial bench overlooking Loch Naver. The caption was brief, 3 years. We're learning to live with the questions. That single sentence captured everything. Not moving on. Not finding closure. Not accepting. Just learning to live with the questions. Because that's what remains when someone vanishes without explanation. Not answers. Not peace. Just questions that echo louder the longer they go unanswered. The official police investigation remains open. Technically, Finn Creaney is still a missing person. Not legally declared dead. Not recovered. Just absent. Police Scotland maintains that there's no evidence of foul play. No suggestion that anyone else was involved. No reason to suspect anything other than a tragic accident in unforgiving terrain. But they also haven't found a body. And without a body, there can be no death certificate. No legal closure. No way to fully settle Finn's affairs. Lucy exists in a legal limbo. Married to a man who's been gone for 3 years but isn't legally dead. Unable to fully move forward. Unable to return to what was. She's consulted with lawyers about having Finn declared dead in absentia. It's possible after 7 years in Scotland. But 7 years is a long time to wait when you have children who need stability, who need to understand their reality. And there's another complication. Part of her doesn't want to declare him dead. Because doing so would mean accepting something she's not certain of. It would mean closing a door that, however unlikely, might still be open. The sightings Mark mentioned in the family's statement are perhaps the cruelest aspect of the whole ordeal. Over 3 years, multiple people contacted the family or police claiming to have seen Finn. Someone matching his description was spotted in Fort William. Someone with long hair and a brown jacket was seen in Inverness. A man who looked like the missing person posters was photographed in a crowd in Edinburgh. Each report was investigated. Each one led nowhere. Either they were cases of mistaken identity, people seeing what they wanted to see, or they were deliberate hoaxes. But each report reignited hope. And each dead end deepened despair. Lucy described it as emotional whiplash. The surge of possibility followed immediately by crushing disappointment. After a while, she stopped allowing herself to hope when new tips came in. It was easier to assume they'd lead nowhere. Less painful when they inevitably did. Mark eventually returned to his life in England. But he didn't return unchanged. 18 months in the Highlands, searching for his son, had fundamentally altered him. He'd lost weight. Aged visibly. Developed a 1,000-yard stare that comes from looking at emptiness for too long. Friends said he wasn't the same person who'd left. How could he be? He'd spent a year and a half living in a tent, walking 20 miles a day, examining every shadow and shape, hoping each time that this would be the day he'd find Finn. And he'd found nothing. Not because he hadn't looked hard enough. But because there was nothing to find. Or because whatever was there to find was hidden too well for any human effort to uncover. Mark still thinks about the loch constantly. In interviews, he returns to the swimming theory again and again. It's the only explanation that makes sense to him. The only narrative that fits the evidence. Finn left his rucksack on the shore. He attempted to swim across. The cold water incapacitated him. He drowned. His body sank and hasn't resurfaced. It's logical. It's consistent with what they know. But it's not certain. And that uncertainty gnaws at Mark the way it gnaws at Lucy. Because what if he's wrong? What if Finn never tried to swim the loch at all? What if the rucksack ended up on the shore some other way? What if Finn made it past the loch and something else happened farther along his route? The problem with theories is that they're just theories. And when you're grieving someone whose body hasn't been found, theories aren't enough. There's a phenomenon in psychology called ambiguous loss. It's the grief that comes from losing someone without closure. Without certainty. Without remains. It's the grief of families whose loved ones vanish in natural disasters. Whose relatives disappear in war zones. Whose children are never found. It's considered one of the most difficult types of loss to process because the human mind struggles with ambiguity. We need endpoints. We need certainty. We need to know. And when we don't know, we can't properly grieve. We exist in a perpetual state of limbo. Half grieving. Half hoping. Unable to commit fully to either emotion because both feel like betrayal. If you grieve, you're giving up hope. If you hope, you're refusing to face reality. Lucy lives in this space every day. She's raising her children. Working. Functioning. But underneath the functionality is a question that never stops asking itself, is Finn alive? Her rational mind says no. Of course not. 3 years in the Scottish Highlands without contact, without sightings, without evidence. He can't be alive. But a small, stubborn part of her, the part that loved him, that built a life with him, can't fully let go. Because without a body, there's always a chance. However microscopic. However unlikely. There's a chance. And that chance makes it impossible to fully close the door. Luna started therapy in 2024. She was struggling at school. Acting out. Having nightmares. The teacher called Lucy in for a meeting, gently suggesting that Luna might benefit from professional support. Lucy agreed immediately. In therapy, Luna talked about her dad. About not understanding where he went. About being angry at him for leaving. About feeling guilty for being angry because maybe it wasn't his fault. The therapist explained that Luna was experiencing complicated grief. Grief complicated by absence, by uncertainty, by the fact that her father's disappearance had never been explained in a way that made sense. Children need narratives. They need stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. Luna had a beginning, life with Dad. She had a middle, Dad went hiking. But there was no end. Just silence. And that silence was eating away at her. The therapist worked with Lucy to help Luna build a narrative she could live with. Not necessarily the truth, because they didn't know the truth, but a story that allowed Luna to process her grief without being paralyzed by unanswered questions. They told her that Daddy had gone on a hike and had an accident. That he'd loved her very much. That what happened wasn't anyone's fault. It wasn't the whole truth. But it was enough truth for a 7-year-old to carry. The YouTube channel, Wildcat Bushcraft, still exists. Finn's videos are still online. Hundreds of hours of footage showing him teaching bushcraft skills, wild swimming, hiking through Scottish landscapes. After he disappeared, the channel became a kind of archive. A digital memorial. People left comments. Thousands of them. Thinking of you, Finn. Hope you're found soon. Your family deserves answers. And then, as time passed, the comments changed. Rest in peace, Finn. Gone but not forgotten. May you find your way home. The comments section became a place where strangers processed collective grief for a man they'd never met but felt they knew through his videos. Lucy couldn't watch the videos for a long time. It was too painful to hear his voice. To see him moving, smiling, alive. But eventually, she did watch. Because she wanted Bran to know his father. She sat with her son and showed him footage of Finn teaching children how to build fires. How to purify water. How to navigate using the sun. Bran watched, fascinated. That's Daddy, he asked. Yes, Lucy said. That's your daddy. Bran was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, where is he now? And Lucy had to say the words she'd said 100 times before. We don't know, sweetheart. We don't know. There's a detail about Finn's disappearance that hasn't been widely discussed but matters enormously. The weather that weekend was unseasonably warm for March in the Scottish Highlands. Temperatures reached the mid-teens Celsius. Sunny. Clear skies. It was the kind of weather that makes people optimistic. That makes difficult tasks seem manageable. If Finn looked at Loch Naver on March 25, 2022, he wouldn't have seen a forbidding, dangerous body of water. He would have seen a calm, sunlit loch on a beautiful spring day. The kind of day that makes wild swimming seem not just possible, but appealing. But water temperature lags behind air temperature by weeks. The air might have been 15 degrees. But the water was still 4 to 6 degrees. Cold enough to kill. And if Finn didn't know that, if he judged the water temperature by the air temperature, he might have waited in expecting cold but manageable conditions. And discovered, too late, that he'd made a fatal miscalculation. It's speculation. But it's the kind of speculation that haunts anyone who knows the Highlands. Because it's so plausible. So easy to imagine. One small mistake. One moment of misjudgment. And everything changes. In their March 2025 statement, the family mentioned something that had been a quiet truth for months. They were done searching. Not because they'd found Finn. Not because they had answers. But because they couldn't keep living in suspended animation. They had to choose life. For Luna. For Bran. For themselves. Mark had spent 18 months in a tent by a loch, and it hadn't brought Finn back. Lucy had spent 3 years raising children alone while waiting for news that never came, and it hadn't brought Finn back. Continuing to search wouldn't bring him back either. At some point, they had to accept that Finn was gone. Even if they didn't know where. Even if they didn't know how. Even if every fiber of their being wanted to keep looking. They had to let go. Not of Finn. But of the search. It's a decision no one should have to make. But it's a decision that, eventually, had to be made. The memorial bench sits empty most days. Overlooking Loch Naver. Wind across the water. Mountains in the distance. Sometimes hikers stop there. Rest. Read the plaque. Wonder about the men it commemorates. Sometimes locals visit. Leave flowers. And sometimes Lucy brings the children. They sit together in silence, looking at the water, and Lucy wonders the same thing she's wondered for 3 years. Is he down there? Or is he somewhere else entirely? And will we ever know? There are places in the Scottish Highlands where you can stand and see nothing but wilderness in every direction. No roads. No buildings. No signs of human presence. Just mountains and moor and water and sky. Loch Naver is one of those places. Standing on its shores, you could be in any century. The landscape looks the same as it did 1,000 years ago. The same as it will look 1,000 years from now. It's beautiful. And it's indifferent. The Highlands don't care about human plans. Human hopes. Human grief. They exist on a scale that makes individual lives, individual losses, feel impossibly small. On March 25, 2022, Finn Creaney walked into that landscape with a rucksack on his back and a plan in his mind. And the landscape swallowed him whole. In the years since, people have asked the same questions over and over. What happened to Finn Creaney? Where is he? How does someone just vanish? The answers, if they exist, are locked somewhere in those hills. In that loch. In the silence between what was planned and what actually happened. The official explanation, inasmuch as there is one, is straightforward. Finn Creaney set out on a solo hike through remote highland terrain. At some point during that hike, he encountered difficulty. The prevailing theory is that he attempted to swim across Loch Naver to shorten his route and drowned. His body was not recovered due to the depth and conditions of the loch. It's a logical explanation. It fits the available evidence. But it's not certain. And in the absence of certainty, other possibilities remain. Maybe Finn never tried to swim the loch. Maybe he continued on his planned route and encountered trouble elsewhere, a fall, an injury, disorientation in changing weather. Maybe he's in a remote ravine or cave system that hasn't been searched. Maybe his remains are out there still, waiting to be found by someone who happens to walk the right path at the right time. Or maybe the loch theory is correct, and Finn is exactly where Mark believes him to be, down in the dark water, held by currents and cold, beyond any hope of recovery. Both possibilities are true. Both possibilities are unbearable. And the family has to live with both, simultaneously, indefinitely. There's something profoundly cruel about disappearances. Death, as terrible as it is, provides closure. There's a body. A funeral. A grave. A place to visit. A narrative with an ending. But disappearance provides none of that. Just absence. Finn's clothes still hang in a closet somewhere. His tools still sit in storage. His toothbrush might still be in a bathroom drawer because Lucy couldn't bring herself to throw it away. All the physical evidence of a life remains. Except the person. It creates a kind of cognitive dissonance. The mind knows he's gone. But the environment keeps suggesting he might return. Because everything is still here, waiting. Luna once asked if they should keep Daddy's room ready for when he comes back. And Lucy had to explain, as gently as possible, that Daddy wasn't coming back. But even as she said it, she couldn't be completely certain. Because without a body, there's always that microscopic chance. And microscopic chances can sustain hope far longer than they should. The community around Loch Naver has integrated Finn's story into its collective memory. Local guides mention him when leading groups through the area. Not to sensationalize, but to warn. To remind people that the Highlands are beautiful, but they're also dangerous. That experience isn't immunity. That confidence can be fatal. Finn Creaney wasn't reckless. He was experienced, prepared, capable. And he still didn't come home. That fact alone is a powerful reminder of how quickly things can go wrong in wild places. One miscalculation. One moment of overconfidence. One unexpected variable. That's all it takes. The difference between a successful hike and a disappearance can be seconds. Centimeters. A single decision made without full information. Finn's case has become a cautionary tale. Not because he did anything wrong. but because sometimes, in wild places, everything can be right and it still isn't enough. Lucy has begun speaking publicly about her experience. Not often. Not to many people. But occasionally, when asked, she shares what it's like to live with ambiguous loss. She talks about the guilt of moving forward. How it feels like betrayal to laugh, to be happy, to live a normal life when Finn never got to. She talks about the children. How Luna has good days and bad days. How Bran is growing up with a father who exists only in stories and photographs. She talks about the questions that don't have answers. And how, eventually, you stop asking them because asking is too painful. Instead, you learn to sit with uncertainty. Not comfortably. Never comfortably. But you learn to carry it. The same way you carry grief. The same way you carry love for someone who's gone. It becomes part of you. A weight you can't put down. And over time, you get stronger. Not because the weight gets lighter. But because you learn how to carry it. In March 2025, on the third anniversary of Finn's disappearance, the family held a small private gathering at the memorial bench. Just family. Close friends. A few volunteers who'd spent weeks searching. They didn't call it a memorial service. Because Finn hasn't been declared dead. They called it a remembrance. A way to honor his life. To acknowledge his absence. To mark the passage of time without pretending they had closure. Mark spoke briefly. His voice was steady, but his hands shook. He talked about Finn as a child. Curious. Adventurous. Always pushing boundaries. Always exploring. He died the way he lived, Mark said. Surrounded by wilderness. Doing what he loved. Then he paused. If he died, he added quietly. Because even now, 3 years later, he couldn't say it with complete certainty. Lucy spoke next. She talked about Finn as a husband and father. How he made ordinary moments feel special. How he'd lie on the floor for hours playing with Luna. How excited he'd been about the baby. She talked about the last thing he'd said to her. I love you lots, and I'm really proud of you. Those were the last words she heard from him. And she'd carried them for 3 years like a talisman. A reminder that whatever happened out there in the Highlands, Finn's last communication was love. Not fear. Not panic. Not regret. Just love. The search may be over, but the case remains open. Police Scotland maintains that any new information will be investigated. If someone finds remains, if new evidence surfaces, if there's any development at all, they'll respond. But realistically, after 3 years, the chances of new evidence are vanishingly small. The Highlands have been searched extensively. The loch has been scoured by professional divers. Every reasonable lead has been followed. If Finn is out there, he's somewhere no one has thought to look. Or somewhere no one can reach. The harsh reality is that some people who disappear in wild places are never found. Not because searchers didn't try hard enough. But because the wilderness is vast and unforgiving and indifferent to human need for closure. Finn Creaney may be one of those people. A missing person who remains missing. Forever. If you've stayed with this story to the end, you've experienced something that Finn's family lives with every single day, the weight of questions without answers. If this moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone who might find meaning in this story, please share it with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply bear witness to each other's grief. Luna is 8 now. She's learning to live with her father's absence. She doesn't cry as much anymore. The therapy helped. The passage of time helped. But there are still moments when she'll see something, a man with long hair, a brown leather jacket in a shop window, and for a split second, she'll think it's him. And then reality crashes back. And she has to remember all over again. Bran is different. He never knew Finn, so his grief is abstract. He misses something he never had. He grieves a relationship that never existed outside his imagination. Lucy shows him videos. Tells him stories. Tries to make Finn real for him. But she knows it's not the same. Bran will grow up with a hole where his father should be. And no amount of storytelling can fill it. The memorial bench weathers. The wood darkens. The plaque accumulates scratches. Moss grows in the carved letters of Finn's name. Nature is reclaiming it, slowly, the way nature reclaims everything. One day, years from now, the bench will be gone. Rotted away. Replaced. Forgotten by everyone except the people who loved Finn. And eventually, even they'll be gone. And Finn's disappearance will become just another story. Another mystery. Another cautionary tale told by local guides to tourists who'll listen with half their attention before moving on with their lives. That's the way of things. Time doesn't heal. It just creates distance. And distance makes grief bearable, even if it never makes it go away. There's no satisfying ending to this story. No moment of discovery. No revelation. No closure. Just absence. And the question that Lucy asks herself every single day, the question that will haunt her for the rest of her life, the question that has no answer. Where is he? Maybe he's in the loch, exactly where Mark believes. Held in the dark water, beyond recovery, beyond reach. Maybe he's somewhere else in the Highlands. In a place no one has searched. In a location that will be found by accident years from now, or maybe never. Maybe, and this is the cruelest possibility, he survived the initial incident, whatever it was, and died slowly somewhere remote. Injured. Unable to move. Calling for help that never came. That thought keeps Lucy awake some nights. The idea that he might have been alive for hours. Days. Waiting. Hoping. And no one found him in time. It's unbearable to think about. So mostly, she doesn't. She focuses on the children. On work. On the life she has to live. And she carries the weight of not knowing. Because that's all she can do. On quiet days, when the wind is still and the mist lies low across Loch Naver, you can stand on the shore and feel the silence. It's not a peaceful silence. It's the silence of unanswered questions. Of stories with no ending. Of grief suspended indefinitely. Somewhere in this landscape, in the water, in the hills, in some hidden corner that refuses to give up its secrets, is the answer to what happened to Finn Creaney. But the landscape isn't talking. The loch isn't giving him back. And the silence continues. On March 25, 2022, a 32-year-old father of two stepped into the Scottish Highlands and disappeared. His rucksack was found 18 months later. His body never was. His family lives with questions that have no answers. His children are growing up with a father who exists only in memory and photographs. And Loch Naver, dark, deep, and forever silent, keeps its secrets. Some mysteries are never solved. Some people are never found. Some questions echo forever into wilderness that doesn't answer back. Finn Creaney became one of those mysteries. And the Highlands, ancient and indifferent and beautiful, hold him still. If you have any information about Finn Creaney's disappearance, please contact Police Scotland. Finn is described as 5 feet 11 inches, slim build, with long brown hair to his lower back, brown beard, last seen wearing a black t-shirt, long brown leather jacket, dark trousers, and brown waterproof boots, carrying a green rucksack.